All right, so we are live. Welcome, everyone. This is our 7th coffee dialogue, and the theme today is preparing for your planting. Today we have a special one-person panel. Our CEO and founder, Jay Ruskey, is here, and he is going to go over a broad overview of what is necessary for preparing your planting. If you have questions that come up during the presentation, please go ahead and write them in the box. And when the presentation is over, we'll come back and go through questions. So don't worry, we'll have plenty of time at the end. We only have one presenter today, and so we'll have ample time for answering people's questions and concerns, and just making sure that you're as prepared as possible for the arrival of your plants. And without further ado, I will turn this over to Jay.
Cool. Thank you, Ben. Well, welcome everybody. It's like a fringe all-star farmer network here. I appreciate you making some time for your day for me. And for those who are watching, that means you guys are all farmers, and that means you're very brave and you have lots of hope. Being a farmer can be very rewarding, but it's one of those processes that you have to do it from your heart, and you have to be resilient to all the changing environments and markets. We hope what Fringe is offering to the farmer is the best for the farmer, for their land and what they want to do and their lifestyle and their investment. And what I've over the years, we've presented and done different types of plantings. Worked originally with Mark Gaskell on trying to establish crops. Some of these, the techniques we're about to learn about came from planting truffles, some came from planting lychees, some came from this, and it's kind of this distillation of what has worked and what has not. We're still in the learning process, but I'm excited to talk to you through this today, because this is literally like the latest and greatest version of what we think is for planting, and also gives a broad overview on how we've tried to streamline the Fringe interaction for plant materials and how what we should expect moving forward. Most of it applies, but everybody's different and every farm's different. So I'm going to go through this presentation. I actually have two from our company. This first one's going to go over specifically how to preparing for planting and what to expect. But I did put together another deck on shelter belts and some trees that we're using to help decrease the wind, because I've been to about 25 farms in the last 2 weeks, and wind is the biggest topic. So I'm putting a little bit of time towards that. So I assume everybody sees the preparing for planting slide. Let's go to the agendas here. So this is basically what we're going to go over. It's a lot. I'm going to go over it rather quickly. I do have high value for Q&A and the value of individual farmers. I think we can learn from each other. My original intention actually is to have more grower meetings face-to-face. I think that's around the corner here, but this is a great way for us to go over this, and then you can hit replay and all that on the YouTube component. So if any of you, I know some of you have been through this process. So, if you're interested in planting, there's a lot of preparation. So you have this, it's a timeline. So I encourage everybody to sit down with a piece of paper or dry erase board and try to work about a schedule of planting, estimating week periods. I think that's extremely important time period. It's usually something to do good, or something to start with January. We know that we usually plant in April 15th to May 15th. We have to keep our eye on the weather. Just because we say it's April 15th, we just need to kind of take a guess. I look out the window today and it looks like a beautiful day to plant, but I have to remind myself that on Wednesday, it was 55-mile-an-hour winds and there was ice falling from the sky in the form of hail. So I'm going to hold off planting until anything. Probably another 2 weeks around around April 1st. I do another long-term weather check. For those of you that have shelters, we want to do, making sure that we're in the best favorable condition. Not only for the plants, the planting, but our investment in time, making sure that, if we dig holes and do some work, that the rain doesn't catch us. Although a good way to get rain is to dig holes and to make trenches. But ultimately, the planting process is super important. It usually starts with land prep, then it goes to irrigation, or simultaneously, and then layouts and how and making sure that when you are ready or feel like you're ready, that you can schedule your delivery. Probably one of the a pet peeve of mine is that over the last 7 or 8 years of delivering coffee plants, is we deliver coffee plants and they sit on a driveway for 6 weeks. It feels good to have the plants. And I know when I do like construction for homes, I like to have the plants as there. But with the coffee plants, it's a little different because they're benefiting from growing in our home or in our greenhouses. And we're taking care of them. We're giving them irrigation and nutrition all the time. And so it's best that our plants are scheduled as soon as you're ready to plant. And this is there's never been really an exception for this. So here is Remy Ho. She's been working with Fringe for a couple of years. She originally started up in our Davis research lab, but she's from Santa Barbara. She's now in charge of plant materials. So her and then Griffin, who did this last year, who's operations manager here at Goodland Organics, they work with trying to coordinate with your farm manager for the delivery. One of the things with deliveries is everybody lives in a different spot. And so we've tried to go through different ways that are most cost efficient, the way to deliver. So every delivery has its unique challenge. Some people live on the top of Duluth and it takes forever. You need a small truck. Some people are in a backfield and you can't get around the corner. So we have to communicate on what the best way to deliver the plants. Ideally, we like to do 2 or 3 deliveries and we can get the costs down. But if your farm is in the back corner and you need a special truck with a lift gate, that's just the cost we have to assume. So all plants are FOB, so you have to, as soon as you get near that delivery date, you have some understanding, we can work with you on trying to figure out what that delivery cost is. About 25% of the farmers actually plant on the days that they forecast. So I get it. We're Mother Nature's one component. There's a farm that I just heard about, that's a big winery, 100 acres of winery they want to plant, and yet there's no couplers. They're all stuck in China. So on a boat on the way. So things happen. And so we understand the delays. So just keep the communication, let it be through Ben. If there's major delays or as you're getting down towards that initial planting date, that last 2 or 3 weeks, and your window's coming, then that we can have that communication go towards Remy and with your farm manager, or if you're doing it. Arrival date, you need to prepare for the arrival of plants. Here's a couple of pictures. There's a few things that we've learned. When they come, you can see in the background on the left, all the hole, you have irrigated holes already dug. You don't have to do it before. Some people do it before. I like to dig holes at planting. I think you have a better soil tilth, but you need to be ready for plant when they show up. Ideally, I've learned that instead of putting all the plants in a tight configuration here, if it looks like it's going to be planted over several days, I usually do 2 long rows of the flats and leave space to walk so that you can irrigate, because these plants need to be irrigated in these pots usually 2 to 3 times. Ideally, a shaded location is best, especially if you're going to be, it's going to take you a while. to plant. I'd rather be on the shaded, just in case we don't get any heat spikes. We tried to provide the plants, we put them through 2 or 3 weeks of shade cloth before they, to help acclimate them, but Mother Nature can play tricks on us. And shading also protects them from wind, and they're young babies coming out to the real world. You'll see on the right, that white powder is actually kaolin clay. It's the brand name Surround. And so it's basically a sunscreen. In this case, we sprayed them with sunscreen to give them a little layer of protection. We highly recommend, once you plant, the last thing you do is spray them with sunscreen again. And I found that this is the best acclimation tool for plants that are planted in spring and early summer. The reason for this is that we're reducing the stress. When a plant is planted, actually the first thing that happens is that there's actually a root development. It now needs an interface with your new hole. The roots are going to now send to signals to start to grow. It's going to take actually some carbohydrates from above the plant down into the root system. And so you're going to see nothing happen to your plant up top for about 2 weeks because the roots are flushing. Well, once it gets to a certain stage of flush and the plants are, the new roots are now pulling new nutrition up, then you'll see this flush happen in the leaf growth. I've been convinced that no matter what plant I grow in a greenhouse and I put them outside, let it be in San Diego or Santa Barbara, the leaf structure that the plant needs to be adapted to that climate needs to be grown in that climate. We can do some stuff to acclimate, but the best leaf in terms of stomata densities and thickness and waxes, it's the new growth. So all the new growth that comes out that grows past the kaolin treatment is perfectly adapted to that environment. And that's kind of the goal. It gives us a nice transition, because this is a very important phase of the plantings. This is some of the stuff. The other components is we don't want to plant when it's hot and windy. I know that's the common theme. Sometimes we deliver plants and all of a sudden we deliver on a Friday, and come Monday, it's a 30-mile-an-hour Santa Ana wind event. It's really the best thing is to not do that. The other component, if you're in a windy day or it's a late season planting and you want to protect your investment, we have these frost covers that can be also wind shelters. And I'll talk more about that. For those of you that do plant and you're mainly inland and you have questionable weather, we have some areas that, especially in San Diego, when you're near the 15, or if you're in Ventura County and you're deeper into the Ventura County Oxnard Plain, we do recommend those shelters. They're really helpful in protecting your investment and to help you sleep through the night as those young trees are going through some of the harsh winter environments. Here's an interesting example of planting. This is kind of not ideal, but you'll see that the irrigation is there. The holes are dug, the soil is moist. And then usually if you look on top, there's the planting mix is right on the right next and getting ready to be blended. We are planting a little bit more aggressively with avocados than these open full sun, just because we're finding with the last 3 years of huge wind events and big heat spikes that with the avocados are really providing a lot of protection. This is a little bit too tight here. The other component, as you look at your budget and digging your holes and preparing your ground, is labor time. I generally, for this type of condition, it's going to take a lot longer to dig a hole and plant. Usually it's about 3 or 4 minutes to dig the hole, and then for planting a couple more minutes. So I generally say 10 minutes per plant per person. If we're in a flat ground, slightly raised beds, and everything is more efficient, then you can probably shave 2 or 3 minutes off of that. And there's a few things you do during the planting process. that are more efficient to your site. And also you'll find that some people dig holes faster than others. So making sure that your team is well prepared for the plantings, and you have the right people doing the right job. I mean, there are people who have a green thumb in your crew, and there are people that do not. And it's really important that the person that's handling the tree has a green thumb. And there are some people who can, who are just better hole diggers. So one of the things with the containers, preparing the holes, really important. Over the years, we've done planting mixes that you should be formulated with, which has a sphagnum mix, which I think it's in this deck here. But I like to do a hole in general, depending on whatever plant you have. That's usually about 3 times the volume of the pot that you get, and several inches below the container in terms of depth. So you like to have that depth, but you have to be careful on this lower end of the depth. And I'll talk about that in a second. Generally, we provide charges of the nutrition. So a lot of times we'll pre-blend, and then we'll have buckets and pre-weight of the amount of what I call a individual charge. We put those on each hole with the native soil, and we blend them outside the hole. One of the things is when you, before you plant, you try to find the grade of the plant. Actually, I wish I had one here. The grade mean the surface of where the roots end, not necessarily the top of the pot. And I generally eyeball that. You're going to plant in several stages, so your soil is going to go in the ground first to about the height of your plant. When you put that in, you want to highly compact it. This is the most important stage, is making sure that these plants are compacted so they do not sink. And so yes, you have a blended soil blended with the native, but you need to compact it. Sometimes we'll actually put a little mound in the bottom, so that, and then you put your plant on top, and then you need to eyeball it or lay your shovel down across the ground, and you can take a look at that. In fact, I did a video a couple of weeks ago on Hollywood and Vines. This woman, Sarah Butler, came out, and I did a whole video on planting. And we talk about this as making sure that the soil grade is even. And that you actually, sometimes I even want the plants to be a little bit above grade, knowing that once you apply water to the soil, there's going to be some compaction going on. So once you start finding your grade, you remove the plant upside down. Let's see. I think that is the next slide. We talked about labor needs. So I like to, what I call, I generally want to save pots normally, but sometimes specifically when I work with truffle plants, we'd actually cut the end of the pots and break them open, so you don't have your crew shaking and ripping the plants. You never want to pull the plant from the stem out. You want to always either shake corners of the side or cut open the side like a book, and just carefully take them out and put them in the ground. Once you put them in the ground, you know, the person planting usually holds the shovel and starts backfilling around the plant, usually about 3 different lifts. Those lifts means you put the soil in, compact it, lift again, compact it, and then lift again and compact it. The most critical component to planting is this point here, is do not bury the stem. I know some of us grow tomatoes, and burying the stem is the right thing to do, but with coffee, it's not the right thing to do. The problem with the stem, or what we call the crown, if there's soil contact and water, or wet soil contact, or wet fertilizer contact, or wet mulch contact, within a couple of years, that cambium, the thin skin layer of the plant, will start to rot, and it'll girdle your plant. And we usually see this year 2 or 3. It's not a problem necessarily with those plants that are in flat ground, but on slopes you have to watch out, because a lot of times the soil from above will eventually fall down, or mulch will migrate down to the stem. So keep that stem clear. Generally, you want your plant dead even with the soil. Some people put a little bit of a well in, and when you put your drip rings, that's okay too. But we'll talk a little bit about the mulching. Is you want to come back and mulch around the plant. And here's another good picture of planting right here. So yeah, so you want to mulch around the plant, and but again, make a donut. I believe we have in the last growers newsletter. If you don't get the growers newsletter, there's a whole protocol on planting and mulching around the plant. Here's a good picture. I think this is out in Ventura where we're doing planting. You see the irrigation's established. I don't know why that one guy's alone, but usually you got a guy doing shoveling. You got or 3 or 4 people doing shoveling, 1 or 2 people doing amendments, meaning bringing the amendments to the site, and then 3 or 4 of those people that you really trust have the type of care and the green thumb to plant the plant and to deliver for what they want. Before you leave the plant, you make sure you come back, have a backpack sprayer full of Surround or a hand sprayer if you're doing a smaller planting, and make sure you put that sunscreen on and you irrigate it immediately. The other component, let's see, I'm going to jump ahead to right here. Through this, and this is the general organic OMRI approved blend that we do. And the reason we do this, and this is actually the one thing I've done for about 15 years with all my plantings in the soils that we grow in. Mark Gaskell and I came up with this, is we use sphagnum peat moss. It's 2 or 4 pounds. If you either have a really sandy or a really clay soil, I would put 4 pounds. And that's a mixed number because it depends the moisture. It's heavier if it's wet. But that's been a good way in which we blend the soil to break it up if it's clay, or if it's a sandier soil, it helps hold water. Compost has often been used, but I'm not a big fan of compost at this stage because it breaks down so quickly. It creates these voids in the soil that the roots can't cross and interface into the new soil. So you also get more of a settling in plants. So if you put compost in, again, you get this, you think it's great, put a bunch of compost in, and then in 5 months, the whole hole settles because the compost is broken down. The sphagnum peat moss does not break down. It's actually hundreds of years old. It also, the sphagnum has instant acidification effect. So it's one of the things in these alkaline soils and water, to be able to put something that has immediate acidity impact on the root zone is key. We are looking to replace sphagnum with biochar. So we have some experiments going on in Ventura. There's 10,000 trees being planted, and 1/3 of them will be with biochar as a replacement for sphagnum peat moss. The second component we do all the time, because we grow in very alkaline soils and our plants are more acid or neutral loving, is sulfur. Use the Tiger 90 pellets. Even if you were conventional, you could go Tiger 90. It's basically the same product. It's actually a sulfur that micronized sulfur that's bound by bentonite clay. So once it gets wet, it breaks down. It won't give you immediate acidification, but over the course of 2 years, they'll start breaking down the bacteria and start giving you more acidification and give you acid buffering. Because unless you have constant pH injected in your water, you'll be injecting every once in a while, and you'll have this line of alkaline to acidity, alkaline to acidity. By having those prills in there, they'll help even that out. We always put a bunch of a good amount of fertilizer into that hole. Right here, it's a 12-12 2.5. There's a 937. I'm not going to get specific to what brand, but overall a higher nitrogen brand. Generally, if you're doing organic turf, where it's high in nitrogen and potassium and low in phosphorus, that's always a good brand to start with. You see where's potash, there's a couple types of potash out there. I always put potash down because it's as important as nitrogen, but it only goes 1/10 of the speed of nitrogen through the soil and the plant. So we always try to bank a little more potash. The other things you can put in, so there's some micronutrition. I like to put like azomite, some minerals. And we're looking at putting more endo package of inoculums in the soil, especially if you have either dead soils or super high, or you're in avocados and there's a lot of going on. A endo package, endo mycorrhizal package is really nice to put in the soils. It helps build a very aggressive and highly competitive planting system there. So those are kind of the components of preparing the plant. Once you plant, there's some top dressings you can do. So on the plant itself, you can go to like compost. Now I said don't put compost in the hole, but you can put compost on top. That helps out. I do like to have some mulch on top. So you have this mulch that can lay down. You can see, and it's just basically mimicking what you would have in an agroforestry environment. A couple other things. Let's see. Immediately after plant, some places, especially with avocados, and you're in spring, you're going to deal with snails. They're not a tremendous pressure. I've seen high snail populations start eating on the cambium of the young plant and get up in the leaves. So Sluggo is conventional organic is a wonderful, easy way to apply and get those slug populations under control. You also want to make sure when you irrigate that we use some drip rings on the irrigation. Let me show you what a drip ring is right here. So this is a drip ring. Originally, I developed this with the truffle program so that I can encourage even root growth coming out of the plant, not create a bunch of weeding problems, and it gives a uniform distribution under the ground. So this one right here is a probably about an 8-inch diameter ring. I don't mind going 10-inch. They're the Netafim Junior rings. They have a 0.5 gallon per hour embedded dripper in the 1/4-inch ring. And so in this 8-inch ring, there's probably 5 drip points. So that's 2.5 gallons per hour on that plant. And then where my hand is, you can't see that, but there's a T, a barbed T that I would put together with a 6-inch to 12-inch, 1/4-inch non-perforated pipes going to my poly hose. These drip rings, they're a great 1-year irrigation source. They seem to distribute what we need. We still have farmers that want to use drippers, but they really create a root system that goes, that has a really narrow profile. Again, what we want to do is pull the roots away and build a stronger root system. Coffee is traditionally not the strongest root systems. It's a seedling perennial. It's probably the only seedling perennial you'll ever grow. Most all your crops like avocados and lemons are specialized vigorous rootstocks on very specialized scion wood, so you can get the quality of fruit you want. Until we're working on grafted materials, we're working on F1s, but for now we have to take really good care of our root systems. Our geishas are a lot weaker root systems than the caturas and catuais. So we specifically for the geishas, this is a pretty important process. Let's go to healthy soils. I know this looks like a weed patch here, but it's actually in the rain, and this is actually my farm. And one of the important components to this is coming in and putting a good cover crop. So here's a good example. I think this farm needs better cover crop here. This is in Rancho Santa Fe in San Diego County. There's the last 18 months have been a lot of talk about healthy soil. CDFA has opened up for grants to not only invest in mulching, but providing compost, providing cover crops. And so there's some cover crop mixes that fit not only for coffee here, but even avocados and lemons. It's in this climate, probably the cover crop window is closed here in March, but it's something you do in December and January and try to time it. So you can get ideally what we call perennial grasses and plants. There's a couple of agents out there and organizations that provide cover crops, so you can tell them what you want. There's some really new, interesting cover crops, like places that have really heavy clays. You can get these tubers or like radishes. They help break the soil. I like the Bromado grasses. I usually sprinkle some lupins and clovers in there too. Generally the perennial grasses, because I want them to stay. So that's an important component. Also, again, if you're a farmer right now and you don't use cover crops, there is the CDFA Healthy Soils grant that will help pay for you the distribution and purchase of those type of items. Let's see. I want to talk something about shelter belts, and I think this is probably my most important topic to me, or where I'm putting a lot of my focus on. And I call them shelter belts, but they're also windbreaks is what we commonly know them at. I think there's another good picture right here. This is actually, this is Morrill Hills. You can see Milano Farms in the backdrop, and this is an old, this is an avocado orchard with the coffee below. I think that we've gone through a little bit of a progression. I think we've gone through some climate changes. We're really finding that trees that are in wind protected areas are getting to crops sooner. They're easier to maintain. We're getting winds that are well above 50 miles an hour. So I've been really, and my team's been looking at different types of cropping strategies to protect not only just coffee trees, but any trees. So windbreaks and all. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a different deck that we provided. But I really want, especially if you have old trees, try to keep them there. If you need more cover crops, or more shelter belts, try to find trees that can help break the wind, because what the wind is doing is not only mechanically harming the tree, means stripping the leaves. Even the lighter winds use more water. You have basically a surface, especially the Santa Ana winds, the dry airflow forces the plant to draw more water. So just from simply trying to save water, having some type of windbreak is pretty critical to really optimizing your plants. Some other things to take a look at. Now, this is a good example of our frost covers. Now, this is out in Montecito. This farmer is actually a well wind protected bowl, but he was also, because it's a bowl, he was really worried about the frost on the 1-year-old trees. This is Valley Heart Ranch. We're selling the coffee online right now, but we put these individual shelters on. We have these cages that we've developed, or modified tomato cages, and then we use a medium grade frost covered, a sleeve that goes over the top. We use these pins to pin them down, and for those plantings that are more exposed or too late in the season, we put these frost covers on, generally by like mid-November, and we remove them by late March, early April. Really important key component to this is, before you put these covers on, weed around the plant. There's been a few instances where the farmers rushed to go put these covers on because the cold air is coming around the corner, and you put them on and you don't want to take them off and re-weed. So if you weed, or ideally you weed and put mulch down, staying away from the stem, that makes it so when spring comes around, that plant isn't being in a competitive environment. with weeds, and in spring that plant is well established, if not already shooting out new vegetative growth. So that's kind of the talk on the shelter belts. I like this planting here. It says weather. I mean, if you're a farmer, you like to talk about the weather. And this is Todd De Alessio. He's a director of post-harvest, and this is out in the Gavio coast. This planting is 13 months old. It is has wind protected. You can see behind Todd by his hats is actually Ingas. So we have some shelter belts running perpendicular to the winds. And, you know, they don't get a lot of winds, but when they do, they get a wind. And really, it only takes 1 or 2 major wind events, if you're an avocado farmer or a coffee farmer or even a lemon farmer, to kind of put a lot of harm to your crop. This planting's in windrows. There's mulch beds. So they go along and they put mulch along a windrow, and I think that's great. I think it's a good way to pull the roots out, and then they migrate the irrigation as the plant gets older. So they do a good job of moving forward. These plants, we were there that day because we were looking at pruning. So this plant we were choosing 1 or 2 suckers and then skirting around the bottom. This is last fall on these plants so that we can start getting better structure out of the ground. And let's see, other tools. I've seen this. So this is a type of weed treatment. And so I debate back and forth. I think if you're along the ocean, this is good, but we have had a circumstance, a couple of them, where the plants were planted and a heat wave came in, a super strong heat really cooked the soil. And so we had about 20 rows of coffee plants on light bed, and the 2 rows of black plastic actually killed, or not all, just because they overcooked the beds. The difference in this is at Milano's Farms here in Cardiff, is that they put the black plastic down after the plants were pretty well established. So you can see on the picture on the right, I thought was really fascinating. You can see the plant there at Cardiff, which is now the desal plant, as a backdrop. That we actually put some, they never had really strong winds, but they had that light afternoon wind. And then once we put some screens up, like you see these wind breaks, the plants really started to jump out of the ground a lot. It made a gigantic difference. Now there's olives and we did plant, I think there's avocados, a couple rows of avocados in between there. Let's see, we need, let's see, there's Dr. Juan Medrano in our coffees and our geishas. He's leading our breeding program. I mean, the main goal for French coffee is to provide more vigorous plant material. And so that's high quality coffee. So with our breeding program out of UC Davis, and actually happening here, we have trials in the ground. We have our own hybrids. We're working with Ecom and CIRAD, which are large coffee institutions in Central America. They have their hybrids with us. So part of what we're trying to do to help establish coffee is create more vigorous plants that do high quality coffee, because that's really important for us and for you. It makes our life easier. And I think from a consumer base, we're always trying to push the limits. Our customers want a brand new experience. They want the best tasting coffees. So it's up to us as farmers to really try to provide that, not only for the plant material, but also the post-harvest. I think we have that's the end of this show, but there's a couple other pictures here that I think I want to share with everybody. I learned a lot by going to other farms, and so by sharing these pictures, remember there was a picture with the frost shelters. This is that planting that following summer. So you can see the plants have really grown up in that first year. They established themselves really well. This is the one in Rancho Santa Fe, an old lemon orchard we went in. This is a year 2 picture. The red labels, one of the things for new plantings, we label every plant. every plant actually has its own serial code. There's actually even a Q code in the serial code. So if we need to learn anything about the plant, we just pull the label off, and I can, or somebody in Fringe can track the lineage of that plant back to where its mother plant is. We can track it to how it was propagated. We can track it like how quickly it moved through the nursery. And I think that is, for me and for our company, that's a way in which we can choose better plant material for you and find more information about the plant. Especially if it's doing really well, I mean, maybe we want to make it into a new hybrid. But if it's doing really bad, then we say, oh, this plant doesn't do really well in cold, windy weather. Maybe this shouldn't be a part of the selection because it has a bad phenotype. We are seeing coffees like this. I think this is too shaded of a plant. Originally, when I did a planting 20 years ago on my farm, I went full sun to full shade to partial shade. This is in the full shade part, and you make a beautiful plant, but you don't get the production because it does mainly vegetative growth and not a lot of flowering. So it's a fine line of trying to find what is a good shade grown. I do a lot of our plantings right now in the ideal world is to have a little bit of a blend like this. This is a decent planting. This is the Morrow Hills Miraz Estate. It's a little bit tight, but having the avocados and the coffee blended in together with a lost sun coming through is a good option to making sure that you maximize your crop. I think also the layered agriculture system and some of the regenerative conversations are important in marketing. Here has grown up a little bit bigger. You also realize that, so this type of system also requires canopy management for the avocados, which you would do anyways. So you have to get into a more densified system. There is more management and even the layered system. So there's always a lot of pruning and water management. It's just in all the plants' favor to compete. It's a highly competitive environment. What you're doing is kind of giving equal opportunity for your plants. On a nutrition program, I believe there was an October presentation that Mark Gaskell and I made. So for those of you farmers that are already established, we talked a lot about nutrition over the long term. And that's kind of the advantage in California is how and when we apply our nutrition. Most of the world, they have to apply nutrition through the form of like granular. What makes that difference, you have to have the right amount of rain. So if you don't rain enough, you don't get the nutrition into the ground. If you rain too much, nutrition washes away. Here in California, in the irrigation programs that we have, we can actually inject the water, inject the nutrition through the water. We can, if we have dry, we can provide irrigation from the top for the micro sprayers. So we have a lot better delivery system to get coffee the nutrition they need when they need it. There's another planting. This is on my farm in Goodland Organics. Looks like we're pruning this day. Always like a good flower. Generally, if you don't know, flowering in California is in like June, July, and August, give or take 3 or 4 weeks. It's a great moment in the coffee world because you get to walk through the orchard and it's quite an experience. It's like snow and that smells like jasmine and all the pollinators are pretty busy. One of the great aspects of growing coffee in California that's different than the tropics is that the flowering happens in the dry weather and during when we have about 13 to 15 hours of sunlight. In the tropics, it's usually in the spring and it's rainy. So I think that gives us an advantage to having high yielding coffee because you get time for the pollinators to do their job, time for the pollen to travel and fertilize the ovary, and you start gaining coffee. And then from that, about 10 to 12 months later, you start gaining coffee. So I think I'm going to switch gears here because I wanted to talk about shelter belts. And this is a good example of coffee cherries. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, is try to provide some coffee, the best, ripest, sweetest cherries. We're really just being fruit farmers. So I'm going to end the show here. And I want to go on to some shelter belt components. Uh-oh. Hey, Ben, can you see environmental conditions and management deck?
I can.
All right. Actually, it's updated there. So this is a deck we've been working on about environmental management. You know, we talk about weather and storms, but there's only so much we can do. It's always been the talk. But what we're trying to do at Fringe and with our farmers is try to create a resilient farming system to deal with the wind, frost, heat, and all those concerns that make farming a little more difficult. Several of you probably experienced the wind damage. We're seeing a lot of Santa Anas. Traditionally, Santa Anas were a seasonal event that happened in Southern California, generally starting in like August, going through November. But that's no more. We're seeing to have Santa Ana events every 2 weeks now. In fact, I think there's one forecasted for next Wednesday. So the wind, as I said earlier, has its ability to not only to mechanically hurt the plant, but to desiccate the plant, especially if there's a wind event and the plant hasn't necessarily got what's on the dry side. I think a lot of what we're seeing with the damage is even though it's like winter and we feel like we don't need to give a lot of water, but the wind is still desiccating the plant. You can generally see it from what side. If it's a quick event, you'll see that which side the wind is actually impacting. You also notice the leaves that didn't get desiccated are a little more leaf curled. They're usually thicker. They're just a little bit more less tender than if there was no wind. You also see some leaves thinning. So if you have a really strong constant event, you'll see some thinning, like on the canopy there on the right. So there's a bunch of types of shelters our farmers have done to get the plants established. You have the individual shelters that give them protection. You have the hoop houses where people, you're in a tight row, you can completely cover them. I prefer the shelters and the hoop houses. Interplantings are really the most effective ways where using either windbreaks or existing plants. There is silt screens, silt fencing that has been useful for some of those plantings, but you just got to be careful. They can handle about 50-mile-an-hour winds, but if you get above 50, the silt screens seem to fall over. So one of the things that I'd rather not rely on mechanical purposes of silk screens and even shelters. I think what in the long term, if we're planting coffee for a 25-year period, we need to really look at windbreaks. One of the general rules of thumbs of windbreaks is that for every foot of vertical, so every time you go up 1 foot, you get about 3 feet of windbreak. With that windbreak, it's actually some zones I've noticed is you get 3 feet of windbreak, then you'll get like 1.5, 2 feet of turbulence. And then after that, it's just like the windbreak's not there. It's a sound, it's like a sound wave or a water wave. Eventually the wind comes back. So when we do our windbreak calculations, we're trying to get, if you have 20 feet high trees, you have a good solid 60 feet of windbreak to work with. That's why I call them like shelter belts. But we need to find like those plants that work well. Ideally, avocados. They've been great. I like avocados. They've been wonderful for most of us farmers out there. They provide income. Prices generally normal, are within expected from year to year. A couple problems with the avocados is the first one, if you want new avocados, you have to wait 2 years to get them. So the second problem is they are slow growers. Not all of them, but most of them are slow growers. So I've been using this Inga edulis, which is also known as ice cream bean, for internal plantings. I think they can handle winds, from 30 to 50 miles an hour, but they rarely make a nice canopy. They grow 7 to 10 feet a year. They're nitrogen fixing, so they're legumiaceous, which is great. They have a nice leaf layer, which that leaf layer turns into organic matter. They're not as light hungry as an avocado, meaning that there's flickered light that goes through. You can hack on these things, and they grow back super quick. So if you get that like 65-mile-an-hour hurricane force winds, they'll lose some of their leaves, but they'll grow back, especially in the summer. In 3 or 4 weeks, they'll start growing back. So they're really resilient. There is a bean crop there that you can peel this pod that has a white cherimoya color flesh. There is, they call it the ice cream bean because it tastes like a floral ice cream. It's more of a cotton candy texture. So they're quite unique. I don't have any crop market information. We at Goodland Organics sold our first crop of 600 pounds in 2 weeks this year. But that was my first crop, and we did through direct selling. So there's something there. The fact that you can get edible crop off of a effective shelter belt or shelter tree would be great. I do think these are good in the middle of large plantings with no protection, but they're not really necessarily the ones that you would use for, if you're on the ridge top and you're trying to stop a 65-mile-an-hour wind. Here's some more Inga development. These pictures are a little hard. In 1 year, so the one on the left is a 1-year plant that went straight up, and then by year 2 and 3, you're already seeing a 12-foot canopy. Now for primary windbreaks, meaning that they can handle winds above 50 miles an hour. I mean, California is well known, to use eucalyptus trees. I was in Ventura yesterday. I went to 6 farms and drove through, and eucalyptus trees have been the common windbreaks in Ventura County. They're not that great to plant next to because they have very aggressive roots and fungal components to the weak trees like avocados or lemons. But the casuarina trees are actually do a great job of breaking the wind. They're drought tolerant. They're cold tolerant. I've seen pictures of them in Mongolia where they're surviving. I mean, they're originally from Australia, so they're a pretty tough tree. I like the tree so much, I named my daughter Casuarina, so just changed the name. But they're a good plant, so we're trying to propagate more of those for ourselves. And then these are the types that I would put like on the ridge or at the beginning of your planting, just to stop that hard wind from coming over. They're loud. They have wispy, long pine needle leaves, but they do a good job. You still want to irrigate them for the first 3 or 4 years. I saw some 2-year-old casuarinas in Sagakoi yesterday that were planted with the avocados, and they were already like 15 feet tall. So that was really encouraging. There's some smaller ones, 10 years. You know, you can hedge them. I generally do about 5 feet apart. You can start off small and thin them. Let's see. So here's another plant. Let's see, called Prosopis Alba. It's basically Chilean carob. So there needs to be a picture here, but they have a very deep taproot, great for erosion. They're good. They can handle high winds, but they diffuse light great. There's a small plant right there. I'm sure you can high mountain Andean carob. The carob pod itself can be about 60 to 65% sugar, so you can actually buy the powder for baking at Whole Foods here in town. So it does produce a crop. This is a plant that we're trying to do an upper canopy component to it. Let's see. There's no. They're very light, and their leaf structure. They look a little bit more like a tipo tipawana. The only downside to these prosopis is they have thorns. So you need to be careful at your management. There's a planting that we did that we're actually going to do in Ventura, where there's a lot of public traffic, and we want, instead of just using a chain link fence, this is a good plant to provide a windbreak and discourage people from trespassing. Let's see, got some frost damage. When I first started coffee, this is always the big deal. With frost damage, the first year is most critical, and there's just not a lot of buffer, not a lot of roots, not a lot of leaves. So we really want to make sure that our covers are on if we're in an area that can get frost. There was a couple farms this year that said, I never get frost, never had frost, and got frost. So every year is a little different. What you can do during a frost event, making sure the covers are touching the ground, making sure there's no weeds. Those covers, if they're properly installed and managed, you can get a 2 to 4 degree delta from the outside temperature to the inside. But you have to make sure that they're actually insulating. You generally don't want the leaves touching the canopy either, because that will actually transfer the cold, and usually the leaves that are touching during a cold event will actually burn. So making sure your plant is well irrigated for a cold event, I think is key. I think in California we get sidetracked thinking that we get rain, so we get an inside slider that give us like a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch of rain, which really isn't enough. And then we get a wind event, which dries it out. And then the next day, there's a nice cold air mass sitting on us. And that's where I think we get tricked into thinking everything's okay. Usually on day 2, when that cold air settles in after the wind, you really want to keep the water on it because the dehydration makes the plant more susceptible to damage. Heat damage and management. For years, I didn't have this problem until the last 3 years, or seen this problem. I've also seen it, I think on avocados especially. Coffee itself during heat, as long as they're irrigated, they seem to do fine. You'll get actually good big growth spikes during the big months. It's when we get these high heats, and when I mean high heat, up to 110, and we get wind. It's basically a convection oven, and so we need to protect ourselves a little bit. Plants can't take in water during a heat event. Sometimes they'll actually protect themselves and close their stomatas and not be able to pull water up. So you want to pre-hydrate them. If you want, they're small trees. You could add more surround on the tips to protect those tips. We did that this last Labor Day heat event on some of our germplasm, and that seemed to work out well and didn't take up too much labor. But you really, the biggest thing that seemed to have helped curtail some of the big events is having some trees nearby because it stopped the wind mainly. It's the wind and heat together that seems to be a used to be what we call a rare event is now becoming more common. So we're really trying to protect that. And then finally, I think this is my last slide regarding some shade. There's a few of the plantings where we've planted in between avocado trees, and the change of management has let avocado trees just grow in the shade and makes it a little difficult for the plant to produce a crop. It's a beautiful tree, but you really want to make sure that you don't overshade your coffee trees despite what you hear about. So I think those are mainly the environmental threats. So overall, I'm about an hour into this presentation. We've talked about plantings. We've talked about preparing to plant, our coordination to plant, our preparing our soil, how to plant, nutrition management, irrigation, making sure we irrigate. We've talked about the environmental threats, with the shelter belts and providing windbreaks. And so I probably gave you all a bunch of fodder to ask a lot of questions. And that's a good thing. I have figured if you can grow a coffee tree, you can probably grow any tree because of all the requirements of growing coffee. We hope that the systems that we're providing you will help you become successful. And that is the key goal for me on the agronomy side. How can you be successful? So Ben, did I miss anything, or did you, would you like me to highlight, or how would you like to move forward?
Yeah, I think that was a great presentation, Jay. Thanks so much for doing that. I think right now we'll dive into some questions. Just real quick for everyone, this is being recorded and will be put up on YouTube. So if you don't want to be on YouTube, keep your video off. And if you don't mind, and you'd like to have your video turned on and engage in a discussion in which we can see your face, that's great as well. I think I'll start by kind of going through some of the questions that have been put in the box. And if you want to kind of jump in the queue, you can just type a question in the box and I'll work my way to it. Real quickly in the chat, I put Remy Ho's email in the chat box. And I'll also go through and pull up that video that Jay spoke about on a YouTube channel called Hollywood and Vine, or Vines in Hollywood, and put that in the chat as well. And you can see a recent video of Jay planting coffee on his farm. So to start, we have a question from Margot, and her question is a couple of questions. Number one, have you tried compost tea in your irrigation system, and do you recommend it?
Thank you, Margot. Hello, Margot. I think I'm going to your farm on Monday. The compost tea, I had a period in my life where I built all my own brewers and made my own compost and I really like the vermiculture compost teas. I think it has a specific application. What compost tea is, for those of you who don't know, is you actually can extend the impact of your compost by extracting and growing out the beneficial organisms within that superior compost. And you do that by putting it in water and sugar and putting it in a highly oxygenated environment so that hopefully the microbes leave the compost and start swimming in an environment of sugar, water, and oxygen and growing. Then you can take that filtered component and inject it into your water system so that the trees are getting a more available compost, or the ground is. So it's very good at inoculating your soils. especially if your soils are new. I think the compost teas are great. There's some things you can do to add more nutrition to it. I think where I've made mistakes in the past is I've supplemented compost tea for too much of the nutrition requirements. So I think it's like, I feel like when I drink like a Kavita or a kombucha, I'm drinking a compost tea. And so if I compare it to like the body, like it's a great supplement to like a probiotic for your plant, but it's not like real nutrition for your plant. It's not real calories. It'll actually, if you put fertilizer down and you follow with a compost tea, it'll actually be the bacterias and the fungi that will help break down the what you need to for the plant, or what the plant needs to make that nutrition more realized. I also think another application for compost tea is right after you put a fresh round of mulch down. If you put a compost tea on or some type of mycorrhizal package, that'll help accelerate the breakdown of those beneficial microorganisms, and that would help. So I think I worked with truffles for quite a long period of time, so I have a large appreciation for what happens below the ground at the microorganism level. And so trying to outcompete with beneficial microorganisms is great. For any of those avocado groves that have some threat of root rot, the teas also help by creating that beneficial environment. So use it, but don't rely on it as your major source of nutrition.
All right. And the next question from Margot is, in our irrigation plan from Fringe, it calls for 2 emitters, but this looks like you're recommending the spaghetti tube.
Yes. With our, there are 2 approaches to doing the drippers. Are their early irrigation. So if you're on flat ground, I think having 2 emitters on either side of the plant has worked, but I believe if you have any type of slope, the round emitters work better. And after going through a few farms this week on seeing the different terrains, and specifically knowing what your terrain is, I'm going to recommend that we go for the round emitters.
All right, so that sounds like it's a good question for all our new growers to check in with your field manager and just make sure that you have the right irrigation setup. Okay, and then the third question from Margot, and I think I can answer this. Sluggo isn't organic, is it? And I do believe that Sluggo is organic. There is an organic.
It's OMRI. It's OMRI approved.
All right. Great. So moving on to the next question. This comes in from Elise Co-Family Farms, or David Wallace, who's a new grower in the Duluth area. And the question is, when planting, is it recommended to use an additional stake or stakes along with whatever comes with the plant? If not recommended during planting, when should one be used?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think staking has, especially if it's a windy environment, or if you get, if the trees are really large, the stake will help secure the tree. Some of our growers are using the crop shelters, the framework as the stakes too, where you put the shelter down and then you can tie off. But I do find that there are some farms that benefit from the stakes. I'm generally not a fan of a single stake. I do like a double stake where you, because if you do one stake, you gotta be careful about implementing that and putting it in the ground because I've seen growers or farmers knock the root ball by forcing the stake through that young root ball. Generally, we like to do 2 stakes on either side. Ideally, if you get them in the native soil, well, they'll hold tight, and then put 2 straps around so that they're counter forces. When you're doing staking, especially on a slope, it's pretty common to say, let's stake along the contour of the slope because it looks better. But I think I'm finding that you just have to be saying, hey, if your winds are coming from off the ocean and your slope's facing the ocean, you actually want to go 90 degrees or perpendicular to that wind. So the plant's not doing this, but it seems to make a stronger tie down. And again, trying to put your stake in the native soils better. You'll see that, or I have seen where the stake is done in the traditional hole, the prepared hole. It doesn't, if it doesn't penetrate all the way back into the native soil, it holds well through the summer, and then come the winter, the ground gets wet with rains, and then the wind comes, and then the stakes lose their foundation to hold the tree. So try to make sure when the stake is impaled in the ground that you're into some type of native soil, then you'll get a more effective and longer life out of that stake.
All right, and another question that comes in from Dave is, are there any trials being used with hoop houses for wind and frost protection?
Well, we do some, the plants actually we're growing for this year are in coming from tunnels or hoop houses, just single layer plastic. It's rather close to the ocean, so there's not really a big threat of frost. We have some trials with some hoop houses. So they are working, they do work pretty well. The plant grows a little bit different, but again, I've been growing a lot of our small plants that way. I do caution, let's see, let's start over. So I think the hoop houses can add more daily heat gain and protect the plants from wind. So I think there is some benefits there. I want to caution anybody to think that a high tunnel will protect them from frost. I've seen more than just coffee out there. I've seen passion fruit. I've seen other exotic plants that the farmer has put them in tunnels. Then the cold event came and everything gets frozen out because the tunnels, they may, they're not well insulated. There are some tunnels you can put 2 or 3 layers on, and maybe that will help. But a single layer tunnel that you see all over Oxnard will actually, during cold air will seep through because there's no insulation value in that plastic. And once the cold air is in there, it'll actually get trapped, and there's no air movement. And so I don't recommend a tunnel to say, hey, that will give me some protection, unless that tunnel is sealed and you have a heat source. So be careful with tunnels. You may get a degree or 2, but it's not like a silver bullet for allowing yourself to grow coffee in a frost-prone place.
All right, our next question is from Mac Allen. And the question is, are we able to mix our planting mix in bulk versus small amounts for each plant?
Absolutely. It's helpful that way. I believe Agroman up here in Ventura is doing some blends already for some of our farmers, and you can get them in bulk. I'm trying to think of down in San Diego, there was an organization that was doing it for Caitlin that can provide pre-blended mix. If you're doing smaller scale, you know, there are 2 ways to do it. You can obviously grab the bag and bucket and do pre-measured cup on the hole, on the tailings from the hole, and then blend it there. But one of the techniques that we've been using is we'll get a large piece of pond liner, which is heavy duty, lay on the ground, and they do windrows of the material within a proportion, and then we fold and blend. And so you can do some on-site blending. There are some, if you have a 5 or 7 cubic foot concrete spinner, I've seen people use the concrete mixer to do some smaller scale. But if you're in the like 3,000, 4,000 tree zone, you should probably really consider pre-blended by a manufacturer like Agroman.
Great. And that brings us to all the questions that we have in the box. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and chime in, we have a good bit of time still available. One of the things, the slide with weather, one of the things I was thinking about bringing up is as we get closer and closer to your delivery date, we're going to be keeping an eye on the weather, and we're going to make sure that we time your delivery to be in a good weather window. So we're not going to try to try to jam it in there, the planting, if there's a heat event or a cold event, then we'll make an adjustment around your delivery date, the specific date. We're going to try to keep them in the same window, but we're used to a little bit of adjustments with almost every site. So we want to make sure that everything's ready on your end, and we're not kind of rushing the plants getting there if you're not ready or the weather is not perfect.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. On the receiving site, I was just replaying some of what I did yesterday on some of the sites. One is the receiving site has a hose with water, so you can irrigate those plants just in case you're a few days out. Making sure it's shaded. With one site, we did a barn where we just put it actually in the barn to just protect it. The other thing that we're doing on a larger planting, which we're in the 10,000 tree range, is we're putting them in the avocado bins. So we receive the plants, we have empty, actually the lemon bins, and we put them in the bins. So we don't have to pick them up and move them as much. And we're utilizing the on-farm plantings or infrastructure because there's 3 or 4 trailers on site, and we can just use the avocado bins as modulated plant movers. And it just saves a couple steps and makes it a little bit easier to move plants. So that's kind of the benefit for the larger growers that has that type of access. The other thing to consider on those grounds that are flat and bigger, on plant spacing, one of the farms, Rancho Alegre, they have a couple pieces of equipment that are 7.5 feet wide cultivators. So we did 9-foot planting so they can drive their tractor down. So the plants are close, but it's a little wider because they have a piece of equipment that they thought was useful. So on your layouts, if you have equipment and how you access, and especially on those grounds that are flatter, I think that's an important key on your layout. But that's usually brought up in your site plans.
All right, we have a couple of other questions that have come in, and I see Bob Tucker's got his hand raised. I'll go through the questions in the box, then we'll get over to Bob. This one's from Mac Allen, and the question is, for an existing chain link fence on our farm, what do you recommend we plant that can grow on the fence as a windbreak?
Oh, I think Frederick's passion fruit is probably your best windbreak for a chain link fence. They grow very quickly. They provide a crop, and they're good looking flowers. So that's usually my go-to. I choose the Fredericks. Any passion fruit, well, there's a couple of non-fruiting passion fruit vines that are super aggressive too, but that's a great plant to provide what you need.
All right, and the next question comes in from Guyana, and it's a question about deer. Do we have any issues with deer? Sounds like they've been nibbling on her coffee and avocado trees recently.
Hello, Guyana. Good to hear from you. I've been debating about the deer thing. I've had videos of people. We have one farm in Venado Canyon, which translates to Deer Canyon, and they have pictures of the deer just walking through, only eating the weeds. I do know the deer, especially when you get into the fall, there's less forage. They'll probably go to the coffee out of last resort. With avocados, it's always been a problem. They seem to be leaning towards more avocados than anything else. for us, the dogs have been great to keeping the animals away, but in that location there, you don't have that opportunity. There are sound machines you can use to try to scare them off. Um, they work at varying degrees. There are a bunch of sprays you can put on there, but that works well until until it rains. Most people use fencing, um, and that works well only if you have a high enough fence. I've seen on the creative, looking back at my truffle days, single wire electric fence, or some of them double wire. That's 2 or 3 that can go around a certain area. That gives them a big shock is a decent management tool. So I've seen that work pretty well, but you have to manage an electric fence. And then last week I heard of someone taking small bars of soap and hanging them on the trees, which I thought was kind of funny. So I don't have a silver bullet single answer for you to manage your deer. It's just it's based on the terrain and resources that you have. And I hope that when spring comes around, there's plenty of foliage that they won't go eating the coffee or your avocados.
All right. So Bob, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Mr. Tucker, are you there? Looks like we might have lost him. All right, got a couple other questions in the box. And let's see, another one from Mac Allen. On the same note, do you have any issues with ground squirrels in the Fallbrook area? And if so, how do you deal with them?
Oh, ground squirrels. I haven't, none of the farms had, so ground squirrels are a big problem from a farm management issue. They can cause damage in the form of erosion when it rains. If they're really aggressive, they'll start actually chewing on the barks of your trees, avocados and coffee. So I don't have, I'm trying to think if I've never seen ground squirrels necessarily eat the coffee trees. I've seen them undermine, I think, coffee trees. Overall, we don't like that invertebrate. Trapping measures, there's a couple traps that you can use. We like the quail traps where you can put food. Dr. Juan Medrano is usually, I was watching him, he's our CTO, but he actually bought a bunch of walnuts and he glued them to the trap, like literally glued them down to the trigger on the trap, so he gets to reuse his traps. So that's one of the more entertaining techniques, and we're doing that now. The unfortunate part of managing ground squirrels is you have to somehow find a way to terminate them. There's the quail traps have swim tanks so that you can put the squirrels and give them a swim test. Otherwise, sometimes using a pistol helps, or a rifle. But the ground squirrels are, in terms of the coffee plants, aren't as big of an issue. In terms of rodents, I've seen on the edge of wilderness, you'll get rabbits that will come in and maybe chew on some bark. I've had another instance where the plants were kind of disappearing, and I looked up in a large date palm and there was a big old rat nest up there, and the rats were using the coffee plant for nesting material. Those wood rats will actually build these huge intricate nests. So those are kind of the rodent issues. Gophers, I think that's really the biggest problem. So managing your gophers, and in fact, then we should probably add that slide in. They deserve a space in this conversation. Managing your gophers by trapping a month or 2 ahead on the land is key. Also, the one advantage of pre-drilling your holes a day or 2 before is you can come up to a hole and all of a sudden there's a gopher in there, and then you can manage that gopher before you plant a fresh, juicy, yummy tree in the ground. And then So the Maccabee or the black hole traps seem to be the best ones that we use given our soil. Creating habitat for owls has been relatively successful on many farms. Large tea stands for hawks. So it's kind of an all-out effort to manage, get the gopher population under a manageable control. So we could do probably a whole dialogue on gopher management.
Next question is from Dave Wallace, and it's what's the estimated square foot to make a temporary shade staging area to keep the trees while planting for a 3 to 4 day hold?
Okay, so here's the key calculation for the plant. So we consolidate them back into a 12-pack tray. And that individual tray of 12 trees takes up 1.3 square feet. So, you know, you can do your math on like how much space you need, floor space on a truck, and then how much space you need for your receiving area.
All right, great. Thanks, Jay. And then the next question from Kristen Lewis is, does Fringe sell Casarenia plants?
We have. I think I'm sold out today, but we started propagating more. So that's we can do Casarenia plants. Brokaw Nursery also has been selling Casarenia plants. You have to put an order in with them. So if you want the Casarenia plants, it's one of those things you should probably order in the next, several weeks, so that we can get them propagated so they be put in the ground this summer. Inga trees, we're now sold out of Ingas, but we're propagating them. We'll have another round of Ingas this July and August, maybe probably more like August. They propagate really quickly, and we have an aggressive plan to try to get those ready for the current growers and future growers.
All right, it looks like Bob's back on the line, so I'll ask him to unmute. Bob, you still have your question? Well, if you can type it into the box, Bob, I can't hear anything you're saying. So do we have any other questions out there that people are looking to have answers? Got a lot of positive feedback in the chat from Dave, from James, and from Guyana, thanking you for your insights.
Cool, thank you.
And so Bob, I'm not hearing your question. Why don't you go ahead and just email that into me and I'll get you the answer and we can help you out like that. And so is there anything else you'd like to say, Jay, in closing?
No, this is a great opportunity to reach out to many of you. I prefer to do this over several cups of coffee on our farms. So under the circumstance, this is what we're doing, and I hope to try to get out to you. We do have, Caitlin is going to extend her maternity leave. So we have Kara Malone, who is now working for us as a farm advisor. She's a very experienced farmer. She has planted over 4,000 coffee trees in her consulting career, and now is a Fringe farm advisor. So if you're a current farmer, you should have got a questionnaire in the last 10 days. You should fill that out and get back to us so we can start surveying. We're also putting together a grower portal in the future. So like this video and other protocols can be, as a Fringe community, they can be located in a general area. And then we're going to provide specific private locations to put your very own coffee stuff, like your cultivation plans, any of your water, tissue, soil analysis. Those are key elements you want to keep in one location, and things regarding to your future harvest and sell your coffee. So we're trying to we will be taking this whole farming program to the next level here in the next few months. So all you with the new plantings, you know, just try to draw out your timelines and modify them. I mean, the rain comes, all of a sudden you're off a week, we get it, but try to draw a timeline and keep the communication level up with Ben or Remy. Okay. So thank you, Ben, for putting this on. I think this is helpful, and it's good to reach out to all of you.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to stop the recording and just say thanks to everyone for showing up, and we'll post this on YouTube if you want to watch it again, or if you weren't able to join us. All right, thank you, everybody.